Have you ever eaten dinner alone? Not once. Not because your schedule was busy, not because your partner was traveling, but every single night, for 1 year, 365 days. Would it feel peaceful or painfully quiet? Would the silence heal you or slowly reveal the parts of yourself you have been avoiding? She did not plan to eat alone for a year. It started with one evening, a simple dinner, a small table near the kitchen window. And the light above her head was too bright, so she turned on the smaller lamp instead. Soft yellow light, gentle shadows on the wall. She placed one plate on the table, one fork, one glass of water. She used to place two. For years, there were always two. Two plates, two sets of chopsticks, two voices speaking at the same time. Sometimes laughing, sometimes arguing, sometimes just talking about ordinary things like grocery lists and unfinished work. But that night, there was only one plate, and the silence felt louder than usual. She sat down slowly. The chair across from her was empty. She looked at it for a moment, not with anger, not even with sadness, just awareness. This is different now. Earlier that month, the relationship had ended. There was no dramatic scene, no broken dishes, no shouting in the rain. Just a long conversation that had been waiting to happen for a very long time. They both knew it. They both felt it. And the love had changed shape. It became something quiet, something polite, something careful. Until one day it was no longer enough. When he moved out, he took his clothes, his books, and the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. What remained was space. At first, the space felt frightening. The apartment seemed larger, the evenings seemed longer, the clock in the living room sounded sharper. Tick, tick, tick. Dinner used to be the center of her day. No matter how busy work was, no matter how tired she felt, they would sit down together. It was their ritual, their pause, their shared breath. Now dinner became a question. Should she cook? Should she order food? Should she skip it entirely? On the first night alone, she almost did not eat. She stood in the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stared at the shelves. There was food, vegetables, eggs, leftover rice. But cooking for one felt unnecessary, almost sad. Still, she decided to cook something simple. Fried rice with eggs. It took less than 10 minutes. The sound of oil in the pan filled the kitchen. That sound felt comforting, familiar. When the food was ready, she placed it carefully on a plate. She sat down, and for the first time in years, she ate without speaking. No small talk, no "how was your day?" No shared stories. Just the soft sound of her fork touching the plate. The first few bites were difficult, not because the food was bad, but because the silence felt heavy. She reached for her phone, then stopped. If she turned on a video or called a friend or scrolled through social media, the silence would disappear. But something inside her wanted to feel it, to understand it. So she put the phone face down, and she kept eating. That night, she cried a little, not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears that fell into her rice. She did not even wipe them away immediately. She let herself feel it, the loss, the change, the unfamiliar space where love used to live. The next evening, she ate alone again, and the next. After 1 week, she noticed something surprising. The silence was still there, but it was no longer sharp. It was softer, like a room after the guests have left, empty, but calm. She began to pay attention to small details, the taste of the food, the texture of the rice, the way the light changed as the sun went down. Before, dinner was conversation. Now, dinner became observation. She noticed how quickly she used to eat when she was talking. Now she chewed slowly. She tasted more. She breathed more. Sometimes she would simply pause and look out the window. Cars passed. People walked by. Life continued. And inside her small apartment, she was learning something new: how to sit with herself, how to eat with herself, how to listen to her own thoughts without distraction. After 1 month, she stopped counting the days. It was no longer day 30 without him. It was just dinner, just evening, just her. Friends invited her out sometimes, and she said yes occasionally, but most nights, she chose to return home, to her small table, to her single plate. It was not loneliness anymore. Not exactly, it was solitude. And there is a difference. Loneliness feels like something missing. Solitude feels like something present. At first, she thought eating alone meant failure, as if a woman sitting alone at dinner was a sign that something had gone wrong. But slowly, her perspective changed. What if this year was not about loss? What if it was about learning who she was when no one was watching? On the 40th day, she lit a candle, not for romance, not for sadness, just for warmth. The small flame made the table feel intentional, as if she had chosen this moment, as if she had chosen herself. She began to cook more carefully, not bigger meals, but more thoughtful ones. Soup that simmered slowly, vegetables cut neatly, rice placed gently in the center of the plate. She was no longer eating to fill emptiness. She was eating to nourish herself. Sometimes memories came, a joke he used to tell, a habit he had of adding too much salt. She would smile and then continue eating. The memories did not hurt as much. They felt like photographs, important, but no longer alive. By the 3rd month, she realized something important. She was not waiting anymore, not waiting for someone to return, not waiting for a message, not waiting for dinner to feel normal again. This was normal now. One woman, one table, one quiet evening. And inside that quiet, something gentle was growing: confidence, independence, peace. She did not announce it to anyone. She did not post about it online. She simply lived it, one dinner at a time. 365 days sounds long, but change does not happen in one big moment. It happens in small, repeated evenings, in ordinary meals, in silent rooms, in choosing not to run away from your own company. She did not know yet that this year would transform her. She only knew that tonight, again, she would sit down, place one plate on the table, and eat slowly. Not because she had no one, but because she was learning how to be enough for herself. By the 4th month, the evenings no longer surprised her. They arrived gently, like an old friend who did not need to knock. She would return home from work, place her keys in the same small bowl near the door, and take off her shoes slowly. There was no one asking, "How was your day?" At first, that question had echoed in her mind. Now, she asked it to herself. "How was your day?" Some days were heavy: deadlines, meetings, small misunderstandings that stayed longer than they should. Other days were light: a compliment from her manager, a quiet laugh with a colleague, a moment of sunlight on her desk. Before, she would share these pieces across the dinner table. Now she held them gently inside, turning them over in her thoughts as she washed the vegetables or waited for water to boil. She began to notice that her inner voice was kinder than she expected. She had always believed that being alone with her thoughts would feel dangerous, too loud, too critical, too honest. But instead, she discovered softness. When she made a mistake at work, her inner voice did not shout. It said, "You are learning." When she felt tired, it did not accuse her of weakness. It said, "You need rest." Dinner became more than a meal. It became a daily meeting with herself. Some evenings she experimented, a new recipe, a different spice, a small dessert just because she wanted one. She realized something simple. When you cook for others, you often think about their preferences. Less salt, more sauce, no onions. But when you cook for yourself, you begin to ask a new question. What do I like? At first, the answer was unclear. She had spent so many years adjusting, compromising, and blending her tastes with someone else's. Now, she was rediscovering her own. She liked her vegetables slightly undercooked. She preferred rice a little softer than most people did. She enjoyed eating in silence for the first 10 minutes before playing soft instrumental music. These were small things, but small things shape a life. One evening, rain began to fall heavily just as she sat down. The sound against the windows was steady and deep. She turned off the lamp and let the room stay darker. Only the kitchen light remained on. She ate slowly while listening to the rain. And suddenly, she did not feel alone at all. The world outside was moving, breathing, alive, and she was part of it. Solitude, she realized, was not isolation. It was connection without noise. On the 100th day, she almost forgot how many days it had been. She was no longer counting. But she remembered because a friend called her. "Are you okay?" her friend asked gently. "I'm more than okay," she replied, and she meant it. Her friend invited her to dinner, a busy restaurant, bright lights, crowded tables. She agreed. That night, surrounded by voices and laughter, she felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not because she escaped her solitude, but because she had chosen it. There is a difference between being alone and choosing to be alone. When she returned home later that evening, she stood in her quiet kitchen again. She poured herself a glass of water, and she smiled. The silence did not feel like emptiness. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to exist without performing. In her previous relationship, she had often felt responsible for maintaining harmony. If he was stressed, she softened her tone. If he was tired, she reduced her needs. If he was distant, she became warmer. She did not blame him. It was simply a pattern they both followed. Now, sitting alone at dinner, she did not have to adjust. She could be tired without explaining it. She could be quiet without worrying. She could eat slowly without filling every second with conversation. One night, she placed a notebook beside her plate. After a few bites, she wrote a sentence. "I am learning how to stay. Stay with discomfort. Stay with silence. Stay with herself." The notebook slowly filled with short reflections, nothing dramatic, just observations. "Today I felt anxious at 3 p.m. It passed. I missed him this morning. It did not break me. I laughed alone at something small. It felt real." These small notes became proof. Proof that emotions move like weather. They arrive, they stay, they leave. Dinner was no longer the hardest time of day. Sometimes it became her favorite, a pause between work and sleep, a bridge between the outside world and her inner one. She began to dress differently at home, not in old, careless clothes, but comfortably, intentionally, as if she respected the woman sitting at the table. Because she did. By the 6th month, the chair across from her no longer looked empty. It simply looked like furniture. It did not hold a ghost. It did not hold regret. It was just a chair. And that was progress. One evening, she caught her reflection in the dark window. A single woman, eating alone, calm. There was no sadness in her face, only presence. She realized something quietly powerful. She had spent years afraid of being alone, as if solitude were a punishment, but perhaps it was a teacher, a patient one, a slow one, a teacher that does not speak loudly but repeats the same lesson every evening. You are enough. You can sit here. You can feel this. You can survive silence. As the days moved forward, she stopped thinking about the future during dinner. She stopped imagining who might sit across from her one day. She stopped rewriting the past. Instead, she focused on the warmth of the food, the rhythm of her breathing, the simple act of nourishing herself. And in that steady repetition, something inside her became steady too. She did not know what month 7 would bring, or month 8. She only knew that tonight, again, she would place one plate on the table, not as a symbol of loss, but as a quiet celebration. She was still here, still eating, still growing, one slow dinner at a time. By the 7th month, something subtle had changed. The silence was no longer something she had to practice accepting. It had become natural, like breathing, like blinking, like the quiet space between two thoughts. Autumn arrived slowly. The air outside felt cooler. Evenings became darker earlier. She noticed how the light through her kitchen window shifted from gold to pale blue to deep gray. Before, she rarely paid attention to seasons changing. Life had been busy. Conversations had filled the room. Now she noticed everything. The sound of leaves brushing against the glass. The distant hum of traffic softening earlier in the night. The way steam rose from her soup and disappeared into the air. Dinner became a meditation, not in a formal way. She did not sit straight with closed eyes. She simply stayed present, one bite, one breath, one quiet moment at a time. Around this time, the loneliness tried to return. Not strongly, not dramatically, just small waves. One evening, she saw a couple sitting together at a restaurant window. They were laughing, leaning toward each other, sharing food. For a second, a familiar ache touched her chest. She imagined what it would feel like to reach across a table again, and to share stories without effort, to hear someone say her name softly in the middle of a sentence. That night, her apartment felt slightly colder. She placed her food on the table and sat down more slowly than usual. The chair across from her seemed noticeable again, not painful, but visible. She allowed the feeling to exist. She did not fight it. She did not try to replace it with music or television. Instead, she whispered quietly to herself, "It's okay to miss connection." Because solitude does not mean the absence of desire. It means not depending on it to feel whole. She ate quietly. The ache softened, not because it disappeared, but because she did not resist it. This was new. In the past, when she felt emotional discomfort, she reacted quickly. She called someone. She distracted herself. She filled the space. Now she let the space stay, and she stayed with it. By the 9th month, and her dinners had become ritual, not routine. Ritual. There is a difference. Routine feels automatic. Ritual feels intentional. She would wash her hands slowly, choose her plate carefully, sometimes white, sometimes light blue. She would sit down before taking the first bite and simply breathe. Just once, just enough to notice that she was here, alive, present. One evening, she decided to invite herself on a date. She prepared a slightly more complicated meal: grilled vegetables, rice with herbs, a small dessert she had always loved but rarely made. She lit 2 candles this time, not because someone else was coming, but because she deserved beauty too. When she sat down, she smiled at the small effort. No one would see it. No one would compliment her cooking. No one would take a photo. And that was the point. She was learning to create moments without an audience. Halfway through dinner, she noticed something surprising. Which she was not thinking about the past, she was not thinking about the future. She was simply enjoying the taste of the food, the warmth, the quiet glow of candlelight. Peace had not arrived suddenly. It had grown quietly through repetition, through hundreds of small evenings where she chose to stay. On the 200th day, she found herself laughing alone. She had spilled a little sauce on the table. In the past, she might have felt embarrassed. Now, why, she simply wiped it away and smiled. There was freedom in not being observed, freedom in not being evaluated, freedom in existing without explanation. She began to understand that for many years, she had measured her worth through someone else's eyes. Was she interesting enough? Supportive enough? Attractive enough? Now, alone at dinner, there were no eyes watching her. And slowly, she began to measure her worth by something else, by how gently she treated herself, by how honestly she felt her emotions, by how patiently she listened to her own thoughts. One night, she turned off all the lights except the candle. The room felt smaller, more intimate. She noticed her breathing again, slow, steady. She realized something quietly profound. She was no longer afraid of being alone at 40, or 45, or even 60, because she had practiced. She had sat through silence for months. She had eaten through sadness, through nostalgia, through quiet joy. She had proven to herself that she could survive her own company, and more than survive, she could appreciate it. As winter approached, the evenings became colder. She wore a soft sweater while eating. Sometimes she wrapped herself in a blanket. The physical warmth mirrored the emotional warmth she had slowly built inside. She no longer saw this year as a year of absence. It was a year of construction. She was building a relationship with herself, brick by brick, dinner by dinner. 365 days still sounded long, but she was no longer afraid of the number, because she understood now. Time alone is not empty time. It is shaping time. And as she placed one plate on the table again that night, she felt something steady in her chest. Not excitement, not sadness, not even pride. Just quiet confidence. She could sit here. She could eat alone. She could exist without fear of silence. And in that calm understanding, she realized she was no longer learning how to be alone. She was learning how to be at peace. By the 10th month, the silence no longer asked questions. It simply existed. Winter had arrived fully now. The evenings were darker, and the cold air pressed softly against the windows. She moved more slowly in winter, not because she was tired, but because everything felt quieter, more deliberate. She began coming home earlier when she could, not to escape people, but to protect her evening ritual. Dinner had become the anchor of her day. No matter what happened outside, she knew there would be one steady moment waiting for her. One plate, one chair, one calm hour. At work, something had changed too. She noticed she no longer rushed to fill awkward silences in meetings. If a pause appeared, she allowed it. Others shifted in their seats, cleared their throats, spoke quickly to erase it. But she remained still. comfortable. She had practiced silence for months. A small, unexpected strength had grown from those dinners. One evening, as she cut carrots carefully on the wooden board, she thought about the word alone. For years, she had associated it with rejection, with failure, with not being chosen. Now the word felt different. It felt neutral, almost clean. Alone did not mean unwanted. It meant independent. It meant present. She placed the carrots into a pot of soup and watched the water begin to move. Small bubbles first, then larger ones. Change does not happen loudly, she thought. It begins quietly, like water warming, like confidence forming. On the 270th day, she received a message from her ex. It was simple, polite. He asked how she was. Her heart reacted for a moment, a small, old rhythm, but it did not shake her. She placed the phone face down on the table and continued eating, not to avoid him, not to punish him, but because she wanted to answer from clarity, not from impulse. After dinner, she picked up the phone again. She responded kindly, briefly, without reopening old doors. When she pressed send, she noticed something important. There was no storm inside her, no dramatic wave of hope, no sharp sadness, just calm. The year had been shaping her more than she realized. Dinner after dinner, she had been practicing emotional balance, staying, breathing, allowing. Winter nights became deeper. Sometimes wind moved loudly outside, but inside, her apartment felt steady. She began adding small touches to her dinner space. A plant near the window, a cloth napkin instead of paper, a small bowl for soup that felt warm in her hands. These details were not expensive. They were intentional, and intention changed everything. She was no longer waiting for life to begin again. Life had been happening in these quiet evenings all along. One night, a sudden power outage darkened the apartment. The lights disappeared. The refrigerator stopped humming. The clock went silent. At first, she froze. Then she laughed softly. She lit a candle. The room glowed gently. The silence became deeper, almost sacred. She ate her dinner slowly by candlelight. No electricity, no background noise. Just the sound of her breathing and the faint wind outside. In that darkness, she felt completely present. There was nothing to distract her, no notifications, no artificial brightness, just her, and she did not feel afraid. She felt grounded. The power returned an hour later, but something inside her had shifted again. If she could sit peacefully in a dark apartment alone, she could sit peacefully almost anywhere. By the 11th month, she noticed she no longer explained herself to others. When friends asked, "Don't you get lonely eating alone every night?" she smiled. "Not anymore," she answered honestly. She did not feel defensive. She did not need to convince anyone. Her experience did not require approval. One evening, as she stirred a simple bowl of noodles, she reflected on the beginning of the year. The first dinner, the heavy silence, the tears that fell into her rice. She felt compassion for that version of herself, not embarrassment, not regret. Compassion. Growth does not erase pain. It transforms it. She understood now that solitude had not removed her desire for love. It had refined it. If someone sat across from her again one day, it would not be from fear of being alone. It would be from choice. That realization felt powerful. Dinner was no longer practice for survival. It was practice for wholeness. On the 300th day, she did not celebrate. There was no countdown, no dramatic realization. She simply prepared her meal, sat down, and ate. But in the middle of dinner, she paused. Not because of sadness, not because of memory, but because she felt deeply steady, as if a foundation inside her had finally settled. The year was almost complete. 365 dinners once sounded impossible. Now it felt natural, necessary even. The woman who feared silence at the beginning of the year was no longer here. In her place sat someone quieter, stronger, more rooted. And as she placed her fork down at the end of that evening, she understood something clearly. Peace is not loud. It does not arrive with applause. It grows in ordinary rooms, at small tables, under soft lights, in the simple act of staying with yourself long enough to feel at home. The final month arrived without ceremony. There was no dramatic countdown, no red circle around the last day on the calendar. The year had unfolded so quietly that the ending felt the same way, soft, unannounced. On the 330th day, she noticed something unexpected. She no longer thought about the number. In the beginning, every dinner had been counted. 10 days, 30 days, 100 days, 200. The number had felt heavy, proof of endurance, proof of survival. Now, it was simply life. She prepared her meals without marking time. Winter was slowly loosening its grip. The air was still cold, but the light lingered a little longer each evening. She could sense change coming again. Not the painful kind, the natural kind. One evening, as she sat down with a simple bowl of soup, she realized something almost unbelievable. She did not feel alone. There was only one chair, only one plate, only one set of footsteps in the apartment. But the feeling of lack was gone. She felt accompanied, not by a person, but by presence, by awareness, by herself. She had become someone she trusted. That trust had been built through repetition, through sitting with discomfort, through allowing waves of memory to rise and fall without chasing them. On the 350th day, a friend invited her to dinner. She paused before answering. Months ago, and she might have accepted immediately out of fear of missing connection. Now, she checked inward first. Did she want to go? Or did she feel pressured? The answer came calmly. She wanted to go. Not to escape solitude, but to share. There was a difference. That evening, she sat across from her friend in a warm restaurant. There was laughter, conversation, the clinking of glasses. She enjoyed it deeply, but something inside her remained steady. She did not cling to the moment. Oh, she did not fear its ending. When she returned home later that night, the quiet apartment greeted her like an old friend, and she smiled, because silence was no longer an enemy. It was familiar, comfortable. The final week approached gently. 360 days. 361. 362. There was no pressure to feel transformed, no need for a dramatic realization. Growth had already happened in small, invisible ways. On the 365th day, she prepared dinner carefully, not extravagantly, just thoughtfully. She chose fresh vegetables, cooked rice slowly, placed a small flower in a glass of water at the center of the table. She lit one candle, not two, not zero, one. She sat down. The room felt peaceful, not silent in a heavy way, but quiet in a settled way. She took her first bite slowly, chewed, breathed, and looked around the room that had witnessed every evening of this year. The walls had heard her sighs, her quiet tears, her soft laughter. They had watched her grow steadier. She placed her fork down and allowed herself to reflect. At the beginning of the year, she believed she was proving something, that she could endure being alone, that she could survive loss. But somewhere along the way, the goal had changed. She was no longer proving strength. She was discovering peace. There is a difference. Strength fights. Peace accepts. Strength survives storms. Peace rests after them. She realized she had stopped waiting for someone to complete her evenings. She had stopped imagining that happiness required another chair filled. If love entered her life again one day, it would be welcomed, but it would not be required. She was already whole. That understanding felt quiet but powerful, like a foundation beneath the surface. After finishing her meal, she did something she had not done all year. She stood up, walked to the second chair, and gently touched its back. Not with longing, not with sadness, but with gratitude. That empty chair had taught her something profound. It had reflected her fears, her insecurities, her old beliefs about worth. And slowly, through patience, it had also reflected her growth. She returned to her seat, blew out the candle. The room dimmed softly. She did not feel the need to replace the silence with music. She let it remain. This year had not been about isolation. It had been about intimacy, not with another person, but with herself. And in that intimacy, she had found stability. She had learned to sit with thoughts without being controlled by them, to feel emotions without drowning in them, to experience longing without letting it define her. As she washed her plate in the sink, and she felt something light inside her chest, not excitement, not relief, just clarity. 365 dinners alone had not made her distant. They had made her grounded. They had softened her relationship with herself. She turned off the kitchen light and walked toward her bedroom. Before closing the door, she looked once more at the small dining table. Tomorrow she might eat alone again, or she might share the table with someone. It did not matter. Because the peace she had built was portable. It lived inside her now. And that was the quiet miracle of the year. Thank you for listening slowly. If this story felt gentle to you, stay with us for more calm English stories designed for peaceful listening and steady growth. Let the silence teach you too.